do is first tell you how I came to learn about Ferdinand Lindheimer, besides knowing different plants that have his name. About a year ago, I got a call from a church that was doing a fundraiser and asked for a talk on him, Ferdinand Lindheimer. And I thought, okay, there's somebody in Comal, Master Gardener, somebody in this area who knows something about Ferdinand Lindheimer. And there were some people who knew something about him, but nobody who was willing to speak. I'm the head of the Speakers Bureau for the Master Gardeners, and it was like, man, I've got to figure out what to do, because I wanted to help this church out. And they were charging $25 a ticket. And I mean, I had to have something to say. I didn't want to, just go in there and try to my way through without knowing anything. And so, because I couldn't really find anybody, I said, okay, I'm going to learn about him. I need to. He's considered the father of Texas botany. So let me see what I can find out about him. Well, there's a lot of commentary information when you go online, reading different things. I can't believe all the different stuff. But I did find, before I go on into the book, I just want to mention what this picture is. It's a copy from Naeglin's Bakery in New Braunfels. There's a mural. In New Braunfels, they have a number of murals. They call that the Historic Outdoor Museum. And this is a part of the mural. And I didn't get further back because there were a bunch of cars parked in the parking lot. So, and you can see the sign there in the middle. But anyway, I'm going to be going back to the mural a few times and showing you some other parts of the mural. And tell me how this works.
There we go.
Okay, so this is how I'm going to approach it. I have a timeline that I created. I started getting really confused with some of the things I read, and I'll be talking about some of his accomplishments. And then I will get into a little bit about the home that you can visit and the gardens that we maintain at his home. So it's very interesting. Okay, that's the book. Getting to that. This.
Went back, you must have hit the button again.
Go back. Okay. So this is the book that I relied on the most. What happened was back in 1979, a gentleman named Carlos Lindheimer from Argentina just happened to drop into the New Braunfels Conservation Society with some letters that he wrote to George Engelmann, the gentleman on the right. Yes. And so she put together, she not only translated, they asked her to translate because she was born and raised, she was from an immigrant family, and she grew up learning German and reading his newspaper, and the families knew each other. And so she was very, very familiar with the Lindheimers. She was a teacher at the University of Texas in Arlington, and she was working on a book at that time. So she said, yeah, she'll do it as a public service, but she didn't know quite how long it would take. And then she also reserved the right to publish if she so desired. And it's just amazing, the research. I mean, it's not just translation, it's deciphering a lot of things. He would take his letters and write across from left to right, and then from the bottom up. He would stuff plant pieces, leaves, whatever in there before the ink dried. They were just incredible. And then she also needed to try to normalize some of the words so that readers would understand that when he says C-O-M-A-L-E for Comal, she just took the E off because it's much more familiar to people without it. And she also had to work very closely with the botanist to make sure that there was a kind of a standard that people would understand which plants he was referring to. So yeah, these are the letters between Lindheimer and Engelmann, and they actually knew each other in Germany and Frankfurt. They were part of a club, a botany club, when they were youth. And so when Lindheimer arrived here, he met up again with George Engelmann, and that's what I'm going to talk about. But the book is absolutely great, and I decided that I would believe her pretty much over other people because the research that she did in this was amazing. She didn't publish the book until 1991. So you know she had those letters and was working really hard. I could not find an obituary. So she might still be alive, but I could not find where she was or what if she had died. I don't know. Okay, so as I'm looking at this, I'm thinking about, okay, but why? Why at this time was this something of great interest to scientists? And it's because there was so much undiscovered about the frontier. And plants are very useful, and he just happened to, I think, to be kind of in the right place at the right time. He was very interested in plants. People wanted to know about them. So he ended up, as I'll talk about in a few minutes, how he became a full-time plant collector. I picked that copy of the book up there about botanizing. That was a new word to me. I mean, you guys are birdie, you go birdie. Well, I've never heard of botanizing before, but it was a new one for me. And also, I just throwing that out with the Native Americans thought of him as a medicine man because he was so knowledgeable and he was always out there with the plants. And he actually spent about 9 years collecting them full time. Well, after I asked that question to myself, hey, okay, why now? Why the frontier flora, all that? And then I said, okay, what about Texas? Why was Texas considered so important? Now, this is back when these things that are listed here came from Texas Parks and Wildlife in 2009. So I'm sure you have some more updated numbers and so forth. But I just, I read that list and I said, yeah, okay, that's why Texas was so great because it is so ecologically diverse. And we have those ecoregions. It's very different in East Texas, from West Texas, from the coast, from north, the panhandle. At that time, there were more than 600 bird species identified. And I didn't realize this, that we had the highest number of birds and reptiles in the U.S. I suppose that's still true. If it's not, please tell me. I was really impressed by that. The second highest number of plants and mammals in the U.S. and California is number one. And then 6,000 species of plants in Texas, and 425 are endemic that occur nowhere else. So that's incredible. Just specific to a geographic area, be it small or large. And 30,000 species of insects, approximately. I don't know exactly how they count them, but it's there. So I thought those were some interesting things to show why Texas was considered so important at that particular time. Okay, so this is the timeline that I had to draw up for myself because I could figure out exactly what happened. And on the right side, I put down, you may not be able to read it that well, but I wanted to make sure I always remembered what was going on in Texas politically at that time, because it's absolutely amazing to me that his whole life occurred when we had so many changes within Texas, from when we were a territory under Mexico and through the independence, became a state, seceded from the Union, the Civil War, entered the Union. Now, I had a little trouble with the Reconstruction. I never gotten so confused. Well, never, obviously I have before, but when I was reading about Reconstruction, I got all kinds of dates, and they were talking about congressional Reconstruction and legislative Reconstruction. I don't know if that was the same thing, and then political Reconstruction, dates going up to 1899. And I finally decided it was 1876, then I quit. Okay, but historians will probably have a better answer on that than me. So, okay, I started with this, that he was born in 1801 or 1802. Everywhere just about it says 1801, including his grave marker. And I think by that time, he knew how old he was. Okay, so that probably is the right date. But his birth records in Frankfurt do show 1802. So, classically educated. He, all the different languages. He studied philology. And I thought, ecology, I've never heard of that. Did they leave out some words? Was it supposed to be philosophy? But I looked it up, and it has to do with the origin of words through oral and written communication. So the closest thing I could think of was that it must be more like linguistics. But he left the university right before he was his 25th birthday, and he became a teacher at the Brunson Institute in Frankfurt. And the school was really a political hotbed. The students were very active. There were demonstrations. He ended up having to leave Germany. His family was in Germany, but they needed to have him gone, actually, because I think that things were getting really hot for him. Now, his son, much later on, said, no, he just went with his friends. He just accompanied his friends, and he didn't do anything wrong or, whatever. But he was the only one that had that theory. Everybody else pretty much agreed that he was part of the demonstration, and he came to the United States in 1834, which was 2 years. Let me go ahead and talk about what happened first. I call it his wanderings. He went to Illinois first, the German farm, and that's where he met up with George Engelmann again. The problem for him was it was very cold there. He could see the stars through the holes in the ceiling. And he talked about a doctor who had 2 pens, and he would put one under his arm and write with the other one, and he would switch them out so the ink wouldn't freeze. And so he was not real happy, even though he was with other Germans and he was on a farm. Illinois was not his thing. He wanted to head towards Texas, but they said that if you come into Texas from the north, it's very dangerous. So you need to come in from the south. So he ended up traveling down to Mexico, actually went down to Veracruz, and he ended up on a plantation, a German plantation, that had sugarcane. And he was there for a while, and he enjoyed the plants tremendously. He thought they were the most beautiful plants, but he just didn't fit. What was he going to do? Run a plantation, help them? Well, they had owners, and he wasn't going to be an owner. He didn't have any money, really. So he ended up leaving Mexico, and he was heading towards Texas, and he got with a group of folks, I think it was in New Orleans, they were enlisting for the war, independence. I think it was in New Orleans, like I said, and he enlisted, according to his military papers, on April 20th. And the last battle was the War for Independence with San Jacinto on April 21st, which was the Santa Ana and San Houston, okay? So, and then the other thing it said in his military papers was that he arrived on May 18th. So it's several weeks after. However, there's one story that you will read everywhere that says he arrived one day too late to the Battle of San Jacinto. I thought, kind of don't think that was true. But it makes a great story, so okay, if that makes you happy. Okay, but he's a soldier, right? And he was a soldier for about 1.5 years. I call him an unconventional soldier because he writes in his letters that he is collecting plants instead of drilling with the other soldiers. Now being a spouse of a military person and working for the military for over 30 years, and I know today's time is not the time then, but it was like, come on, and I just can't quite see that. I don't know how in the world he could just go wandering around the countryside and get paid, and not get into trouble, even though the commanding officer apparently supported him and so forth. The only thing that makes sense to me is not something I read, it's just something I thought, so I may or may not be accurate. But I thought, if he was collecting plants that would treat various ailments of the other soldiers, then that makes sense. But nothing else really did make sense to me. So maybe it's true, maybe not, but I can see that as much knowledge as he had. And that's how they treated people, with a lot with plants. In fact, going back to George Engelmann, before I forget to say this, George Engelmann was not only a doctor, a physician, but he was a botanist as well. And many doctors were botanists at that time because they used plants so extensively. So he was in the service for a year and a half, then he was discharged, and he bought 10 acres near Houston. And first he had a partner. They don't really say, I didn't read anywhere where the partner, how long the partner lasted and who he was or anything like that. But after a while, he was by himself. So he has 10 acres of raw land. He didn't have a family. You know, all I could think, the picture that popped into my mind were the rock walls that we see that form the boundaries of these German farms. And I can see, okay, your kid misbehaved, so you send them out to go move rocks, right? You know, it just made perfect sense to me. But then I'm thinking, but you're single, you don't have anybody else, you got 10 acres of raw land, and you're going to try to make a living off of it. You know, you got a lot of work to do, and he just wasn't really happy. So he sold his 10 acres, but that's why I called him a disillusioned farmer. Yeah, it had to do with plants, but it just wasn't what he wanted.
Not moving.
Okay. So what he said in his letter to George Engelmann was, for almost 40 years, he's been running around on this earth looking for his promised land, and he's been unable to find anything. He couldn't find his niche. And he said, I hope this botanical detour will not be my last trip, but the last one my heart longs for. And what I thought was really cool was he got upfront $50 from George Engelmann, and because he didn't have any money really, and he bought a horse for $15, and I thought, man, the flower cost more than half the price of the horse. That's so interesting. He bought a pair of shoes, obviously, and some blotting paper for a plant press, which is really just 2 pieces of wood with blotting paper around the plant specimen, and then you just put a weight on it to dry him out. And he received $8 for every 100 specimens he collected. But it wasn't just a box full of plants. He had to put down where he got it. He gave it the best guess he could as to the genus and everything that he could write about it. So it was a little more involved than just throwing it in a box and sending it off to George Engelmann and to Asa Gray. Asa Gray was the premier botanist at that time. So it went to Engelmann and it went to Asa Gray. They went to Asa Gray. And then Asa Gray would distribute them out into the world because, well, we'll talk about that again in just a minute. Oh, we're missing a picture. Uh-oh, didn't come through on the slide. Sorry about that. Okay, well, you all are familiar with the Texas prickly pear. And I thought that was interesting because it has Engelmann's name in there and Lindheimer's name in the botanical name. So I kind of thought, oh, okay. And the other thing that's real interesting about the prickly pear, you guys all know about how it has that insect, the cochineal insect, the scale insect, to make dye. And the Spaniards, when they got a hold of the insects and made dye, it was actually second to gold in export from here. So very valuable.
They'll use it too.
Yeah, great. Lindheimer's muley was one of the few plants that I really recognize. It's like, oh yeah, well, I know that one. Beautiful plant, mixed seeds that birds enjoy, nesting materials and so forth. The morning glory is also another one of his plants. Very, very good for pollinators. They just absolutely love it. And my personal favorite is the Lindheimer sin at the bottom right there. Yeah, I was going to say, where I live, it just pops up in my yard, in my area where on our property. I don't have anything, I don't do anything at all. It dies back in the winter and comes back without me watering it or doing anything. And I know the birds enjoy the seeds, so I'm happy that is the case. So he did discover several hundred species, and he does have 48 species or subspecies named after him. And as I mentioned before, they went around the world. There's 2,000 of his specimens in the Smithsonian, but they're in Paris, they're in London, they're all over the place. And actually, it's kind of interesting because Acid Gray would get subscribers who, kind of like the plant of the month, they get a plant, they pay for it, right? Because they wanted to see these new plants that they hadn't seen before. And it reminded me, by the way, of the story about John James Audubon and his collecting subscribers to buy his art. I thought, oh, they're very similar in that way. Although Lindheimer didn't actually talk to his subscribers. It was all done up east with Acid Gray at Harvard. And then I also thought it was very interesting that he persuaded Wilhelm Rookish to bring back Italian black bees to Texas to pollinate the fruit trees. When he saw how poorly they were growing, how the fruit was, he knew that they needed bees. And of course, we know that honeybees are not native, but they've been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. And Wilhelm Rookish also was the first person in Texas to realize the commercial value, and he developed the box frame, I guess where you get the honey. I'm not a beekeeper, but he did quite a bit for the honey industry here in Texas. And all it's missing is the guara, which is just a very pretty pink plant. So no big deal, but that's what's wrong. Okay, so let's see if I can. Okay, on the other slide, you saw the Texas star. I was going to say this is his absolute favorite plant, and this is another part of the mural. It's the far right side of the mural, and he's holding the Texas star, or Texas yellow star, or Lindheimer daisy in his hands. And what I thought was really interesting is he was not responsible for naming the plant. He did not know the right nomenclature to use. That was Engelman and Gray's job. But on this particular plant, this is what he wrote. Did you write my name among the stars with this little asteroid? Did I serve botany in that way? And if he dies childless, he's going to leave an immortal daughter, the Lindheimer Texensis. Now that's what he tried to push his name for this plant. But you can see at the top that it actually was called Lindheimeria texana. That was the correct naming convention. So I just thought that was so sweet. We all have things that are close to our heart, and that was it. Now on the mural, you see a newspaper, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, but not right now. Just to mention, I'm sure all of you just about are familiar with Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center and their native plant database, and this just happened to be the plant that he was associated with his name. There is one tree there. It is actually the hackberry, that species of hackberry that has his name on it. But you can get all kinds of great information from Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center. Okay, we're back to the timeline. So we're up in 1845, and I call this a place to call home. So, how did New Braunfels become his home? Remember, he's kind of a wanderer at this point. Yeah. So Prince Karl of Braunfels, and that's the castle his family had in Germany. He was the Commissioner General of the Edelverein, which is an association for the protection of German immigrants to Texas, and he's considered the founder of New Braunfels. And let's see what's next. Okay, what I wanted to say about it is he found out that Ferdinand Lindheimer had a lot of experience knowing the routes through Texas, and so he met with Lindheimer and asked him to guide the immigrants on that first ship up north, going northwest. But I put this slide in here from the Sophienberg Museum because I always thought, okay, when you get on an airplane or whatever, they want to, how many bags can you have? Well, if you were immigrating, you could only have one chest unless you had special skills. like if you were a carpenter, you could bring two because you could bring your tools in the second chest. And so he wanted, and this is imprint Psalm's diary. You can't really read it well, but he's telling him to bring an axe or a hatchet. Don't bring any gunpowder or lead. Lead's heavy, gunpowder's dangerous. But the one that I got the most kick out of was where he said, bring those iron pots with lids for baking cornbread. And not just one pot, but plural pots. So they must have thought cornbread was an essential food group. Yes. So pretty cool. Okay. So the Delta Rhine purchased 3.8 million acres of the Fisher-Miller land grant. It was a land grant. They got the grants to the property, didn't get the property outright, but got a grant, land grant. And in order to get the property or get any part of the property, it required settlement of 1,000 immigrant families, which did not happen. So the immigrants came in at Galveston. They moved by land down to Indianola, and then they took that route up. And that central shaded area was the land grant. And why was there a land grant? Well, Texas wanted settlers. And so I found it very interesting because they would give like 640 acres if it was a family and 320 acres. My numbers, I get off on numbers, but 300 for a single person. But when in another place where I read what the settler get as a result of hooking up with the Delta Rhine, they got transportation. Well, they paid a little money first off. It wasn't totally free, but they got transportation. They got food on the ship. They got a log cabin when they got settled. They got all their living expenses for the first year. They even had a doctor on the ship. All that was paid for. And I said, well, what kind of business plan is that? I mean, they certainly didn't pay enough to cover all those things. But then I read elsewhere that they promised the settlers half of what they were going to get from the state of Texas once they settled. And I thought, okay, the goal of the Delta Rhine was to create a German colony in Texas. That's what they wanted. I thought, okay, if you give away half the land you get from the state, then you've got room to grow, to expand. And so I guess that was their business plan, but that's what I interpreted it as. But they didn't get all the way to the Fisher-Miller grant because of Comancheria. So the government was saying, don't go that far up northwest. Stay below that. So what Prince Psalms did is he bought not land rights, but actual acreage in the New Braunfels area. And so that's why they stopped short in New Braunfels. And I think it was the next year before some of the immigrants went up to Fredericksburg and then it was established and so forth. So that actually didn't work out for them. They ended up buying the land and settling that first group of immigrants in New Braunfels. Okay, so they're at the site where St. Peter's and Paul's churches in New Braunfels. That's where they camped out in April of 1945. 1945, 1845. Yes, I added extra 100 years. Then I didn't put that on the slide. That would be really, sorry about that. But he was just so absolutely amazed at how beautiful it is. And we know that when we're out and about in March and April, we've got beautiful wildflowers. It's just a wonderful time to be in Texas. So there you see what he thought of it, and he was home. This was it for him. But besides, well, I'll talk about it in a second, but actually Prince Psalms paid him off by giving him a couple acres on the river, on the Comal River. So he gets married in 1846. And that was interesting. His wife is Eleonora, and she's 28 years old, and she's from an immigrant family. It's her mother, her father, her two brothers. One of the brothers is married, and his family is growing. And I'm thinking she just kind of felt like she needed to leave the home because there wasn't much room left for the size of the family. I've got to read this. Okay. Where did that go? Okay. He said in his letter to George Engelman, and you can't see the picture of Eleanor. I'm sorry, that one didn't come through either on the slides. I apologize for that. I don't know why. It was there. You saw that picture of Lindheimer earlier. He was kind of a scruffy looking guy, wasn't he? But here's what he said to Engelman. For my circumstances, I cannot have a better partner. I must have somebody to keep house for me. Boarding and laundry are only to be had at high prices, and that I should cook and wash and mend, along with all my other work, won't do. You know, I will not accuse all the men in this audience of feeling that way, but
At least somebody noticed.
yeah. And so he could not keep up the house and kitchen without such a partner. So I thought that was kind of funny. At least he was honest, right? Okay, so there he is. He's married. He ends up with, they actually had 6 children, but 2 died in infancy. So 4 children. So now he's getting more involved in public affairs, the community, and politics. And I took that first bullet there, the Moisenbach Comanche Treaty. I just thought it was very interesting that just a couple of years after he got to New Brunswick, that he was involved in this. He was helping John Moisenbach come up with a treaty with the Comanches to ensure a harmonious relationship. And he was one of the negotiators, and I just thought that was interesting. In fact, John Moisenbach took Prince Song's place. He was the new Commissioner General. He inherited a big financial mess because Prince Song was not a businessman. And so anyway, he was a newspaper editor for 20 years. And I wrote the river there to remind me to let you know that what happened was in his editorials before the Civil War and the start of the Civil War, some people were not very happy with him. They didn't all agree. And so they ended up coming in and grabbing his printing press and throwing it in the river. But he retrieved it and he got it back out and he got the issue of the paper on time. If you've ever seen this paper, this is the newspaper. And it's actually a combination of his paper, the German language paper, and the English language paper. They combined forces in the 1950s, not the 1950s. And so it's still around. It's been continuously publishing for a long, long time. And even during the Civil War, when he couldn't get the paper for the printing press, he used butcher paper, he used blotting paper, wallpaper, whatever he could get his hands on. But he never missed an issue. Amazing guy. And you already mentioned it's superintendent of instruction. He actually started a school for the gifted, justice of the peace, and then he died in 1979. So he had quite a life. And like I said, it all lines up with what was going on with Texas at the time, which totally was interesting to me. So now, if you visit his home at 491 Comal Avenue in New Braunfels, this is what you'll see. That's the sign in front of his house, circa 1852. And it was donated by his granddaughter. The New Braunfels Conservation Society was actually formed so they could receive the house. She did not want the house to be torn down and sold to developers. She wanted the house to remain. So it was a wonderful gift, and it was the whole reason for the start of the New Braunfels Conservation Society. Those are some other pictures. You can see the marker to the right of the house. You can see the back of the house. You're especially interested in the back with the fachwerk, which is a combination of timber and masonry that was popular in German architecture. And also the back of the house shows the kitchen that was added on about 5 years later. So I'm thinking, okay, Eleanor, you had to cook outside and then washing clothes. Did you use the water in the river? That was an awful steep thing. Were they able to pump the water up out of the river? I don't know, but she had her hands full. And he didn't say it in the letters, but other people said she helped a lot with the plants as well. So she was a very, very accomplished person herself. And you can see there are two front doors, parts of two front doors there. You can make an appointment to tour the home by calling that number. There's no charge, but the house is locked up. There's nobody there unless you call and say, I want to get in, and they come over and open the door for you so you can see everything. But there's two doors there because the Germans at that time would have one door for the formal side of the house where visitors would come, and the other side of the house would be for more informal. But for him, this is 700 square feet, people. And he had a parlor and a bed. He had a parlor and a bedroom and a loft for the kids in half 700 square feet. The right half, the front, was the printing office, and the back room was the printing press. So it was really amazing. This is the garden to the side of the house, and you can visit anytime. You don't need an appointment or anything, just walk in. And of course, I have to put a plug in there for the Master Gardeners. We've been maintaining it for over 20 years, along with the other 8 gardens that we maintain in the county. And you don't need an appointment, just go in and look at the beautiful flowers that are there. Okay, this is kind of in the middle of the mural, across from the parking lot from Nagelin's Bakery. And I picked that because I like this quote. Lindheimer never was in it for financial gain, as far as I could tell. So he said, do right and justice for the sake of right and justice and not for the reward. And that did seem to be, he was very interested in the community and helping people. And it wasn't so much for the money, but he just wanted to do the right thing. Okay, does anybody see what's in that?
Snake.
A snake.
What kind of snake?
A rattlesnake.
No. Rat? It's a rat. You're right. It's a rat snake. And guess what? That's the only animal that he is named after.
Oh.
So I got most of my information from this book, The Life Among Texas Flora. Just fascinating. Also, I visited the home, I toured it, I went into the garden. It's not one that I volunteer at because I'm in Canyon Lake and it's just a little far for me to volunteer there. I volunteer in other gardens. And then the Southern Museum and Archive in New Braunfels is also very interesting. Lots of history there. You can't get into the archives without having a special reason, but you can see a lot of exhibits. And that's the information on Comal and Master Gardeners, our website, and how you can reach us. And I hope you learned a little bit about
In the chat, and Becca has those, and here in the room.
Okay, question?
So twice, apparently, this guy got rousted for what he said or what he did or what he printed. Do you know anything about his political views that made him so controversial?
Okay, why did he get rousted twice? Once in Germany and once and over here, I think is what you're referring to, right? He left Germany.
Austin's, pretty impressive.
I come from a German family, and when I think of some of my characteristics of some of my family members, I think, oh, they're very strong-minded. They believe in certain things, and by golly, that's the way it is. I'm just trying to think of his personality a little bit. He actually, when it came to the Civil War, he believed in state rights, but he didn't support slavery. So, I mean, I guess he was kind of torn between the two, but not everybody appreciated his viewpoint. And
Texas was very much a slave state. Do you think it might have been his stance on slavery that got him in trouble?
well, he apparently didn't support slavery.
Right. Well, I know.
Yeah.
So if he's writing,
Yeah, it could
he's
have.
writing as an abolitionist, then he could easily run afoul of.
Well, I didn't see him identified as an abolitionist. I didn't read that. But yeah, it's an interesting point. I'll have to look at that closer. Yeah.
At one point, you didn't have to be an abolitionist as long as you were not supporting slavery. You were the end.
Okay, so what Ray said is if you didn't support, you were.
And there were a lot of
Yeah.
Germans
Right,
in Texas that did not.
Right, the Ferdinand Union comfort. They were trying to flee, not because they opposed the South, but they were refusing to serve the military.
They were refusing to serve in the military. There were some people, yeah, it's very controversial for sure.
There's
No
a
matter.
history there, and Comfort and other areas around that you can go into, but
I think no matter what you believed and what you stood on, somebody else didn't agree with you. So it was just a very hard time for people in a lot of families.
Yeah, I heard that there was I think from the site that we, for the third centennial, 300 centennial that they had, that there was a group of Germans, and it sounds like he would have been with that were, they were really into classical music, they were very well educated and all that. And not necessarily really wealthy. And some of the Germans that came to San Antonio were not of this group. I think of them more being out there in that area, like around Comfort and in Robinson, around like that. And they actually left and tried to, I think via New Orleans, serve in the Union Army because they were against slavery. And that was that group. And they also, it seemed like they always had a lot of trouble with the Comanches. But another story I heard from some guy that spoke at the Native Plant Society is that Lindheimer would come with his buckboard and, all of his plants on it. And he would make a fire and he would lay down and sleep. And then during the middle of the night, a brave would come in and tie up his horse and sleep there at the fire also. And then in the morning when Lindheimer woke up, the brave was gone. So they really, yeah. And the person thought that who was telling the story, it was probably because he was carrying these plants all the time, and they thought he was a good endeavor.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. He got along very well with the Comanches, which is great for that treaty that he helped negotiate.
They trusted him.
it's a good way to keep your hair too.
Yes, good way to keep your hair, yes.
I have a question about the book that you use,
Yes.
the main source. And it's Texas A&M Press, 1991.
Yes,
Is it still available?
yes,
By that?
yes.
Because it looks absolutely fascinating.
I bought a used copy off Amazon, to tell you the truth. And I also found a copy, I also checked it out of the library before I bought a copy. Our library at Mammoth Public Library had a copy on file, or on the shelf. And so it was, it was available at that time too.
I'm gonna look for one.
Yeah, it is. It's amazing the research that she did.
Well, this was an era of all over the world. People were exploring the new lands. And people like Alfred Russel Wallace and Charles Darwin and all these people that were going around on ships and stopping at places that no Western person had been, or a historian or botanist. And most of the ships had a scientist. They had a naturalist who was the official naturalist. And they were supposed to document what was being seen and take them back to the big museums of the empires at the time and that kind of thing. So Lindheimer was kind of in that milieu. But I will never look at anything. I will never look at the Lindheimer Center in my backyard again with the same eyes after hearing this talk. And I think that it gives us an appreciation of all the things. I mean, he did all the stuff for plants, but look at all the other things he was doing for his community, for his family. And that's just really very cool. So much. So you got a question?
Oh, me? Yeah, I didn't want to, this has to do with the story you just told. The people that, if they would put, Darwin on there or Alfred Russel Wallace, their job was to collect specimens to bring them back, like you said, to the museum. But a lot of people were really rich people that had their own greenhouses, or they taxidermied the birds, and they were paying for that, and that was what was funding the cruises.
Yeah, those are the subscribers
Yeah.
that were paying for these individuals to earn a living, whether it was Audubon or Lindheimer or the other individuals.
For artists, you could say the same thing for artists. They had to have a patron or someone like that. So that was the way it worked back then. And he was in that, and it was just such an interesting talk. So I think you have a question there. Yeah.
I have a comment about, so I volunteer, Karen and I both volunteer for the Whitty. And our project is digitizing this 100-year-old herbarium that they have there that has about 7,000 specimens. And anyway, so digitizing this herbarium that was mainly collected by Ellen Quillen, the founder of the Whitty. That's about 7,000 specimens. So I'm working my way through, and one day I opened up the folder and it was a specimen that was collected by Lindheimer himself in 1850 in Comal County. And I'm like, and so, but then who knows what else? I've only gotten the specimen like 650, so there's about another 7,000 more specimens.
So when you digitize them, what are you doing?
Taking a picture, entering in all the things that are on the label, and then taking pictures of the specimens, and then eventually the Whitty will have that available for anybody to look at those plants. And Karen does one also.
The one that we got from Native Plant Society,
Yeah.
I think. And I don't know how many specimens I have. I mean, we'll be there for years doing this, but
Well, that's what it takes. And Smithsonian has one now. You know, you talked about when were farmers and all that, they recorded when things happened. The first bloom of this and that and the other. And a lot of those were written down by people on little cards or a notebook or whatever. And now they have people will take those and put them in and digitize them so that everybody can search them and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of them were birds. When did the first swallow come? When did this come? When that? And so a lot of the stuff that we're doing now, we're so smart. We have the iNaturalist, and we have Merlin, and we have eBird. People have been doing this for hundreds of years. They just didn't have a computer.
yeah, they did. Yeah, they did it by hand. I did all the birds and eggs prior to that, and you just look at, you see, this beautiful cormorant somewhere in the San Antonio River, and you're just like, didn't see that today.
Yeah.
It was there at one time.
Well, it's really puts him in perspective as part of that, but also as something greater than that. So thank you guys for all coming today. And